400 years ago, if you were a high-ranking member of the Japanese military elite and you were, looking to acquire a master-crafted sword, you didn't look for a glowing 5-star review online.
No, definitely not.
Right, and you didn't ask for some certificate of authenticity either. You actually looked for a very specific number inscribed directly onto the steel tang of the blade.
Which is pretty grim when you really think about it.
It is wildly grim.
Yeah.
Because that number told you exactly how many stacked human corsos that specific weapon had managed to cleave completely through in a single perfectly executed swing.
Yeah, it is a staggering historical reality. We are talking about a society that engineered the absolute pinnacle of metallurgical science, and it was all dedicated to like a singular hyper-pragmatic goal.
A maximum lethal efficacy on the human body.
Exactly, just pure absolute lethality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we are looking at a truly fascinating stack of sources you've shared with us. We have translated historical archives detailing the infamous execution grounds of the Edo period.
Those are intense.
Super intense. We also have extensive YouTube transcripts from the martial arts historians at Japan Be Wisdom of Elders. And we've got first-hand travel guides documenting the modern reality of stepping into a Japanese dojo today.
And, looking at these sources together reveals what I think is one of the most profound cultural paradoxes in modern history.
That is the core mission of our deep dive today. We are going to explore this paradox. Like, how does a culture completely obsessed with a weapon literally evaluated by the sheer volume of corpses it could destroy, eventually transform that exact same weapon into a tool for spiritual enlightenment?
Right. It's a huge pivot.
Huge. How do we get from a battlefield defined by severing limbs to, community centers where children practice an art form designed entirely to build character and inner peace?
Well, to solve that mystery, we really have to start by understanding the physical and honestly the psychological weight of the blade itself.
Okay, so take us back there.
So during the Sengoku period, which was this era of just near constant chaotic civil war in the 15th and 16th centuries, a sword wasn't a symbol. It was literally the only thing standing between you and an incredibly violent death.
So the stakes were absolute.
Completely absolute. And because of that, the mythology surrounding these weapons became equally extreme.
And the sources highlight 5 specific legendary swords that perfectly illustrate this. I was reading through the translated archives, and one name immediately jumped out to me, the Kamewari II.
The jar splitter?
Right, which translates roughly to the jar splitter. Now, I gotta say, that sounds like a classic tall tale. Like, did someone actually cut through a clay jar?
According to the legend of its owner, yeah. This guy, Ittosai,
Yeah, okay.
he was a highly influential swordsman who actually founded his own school of combat, the Itaru. And the historical record kind of blends with myth here, but the story claims he was ambushed by a group of 7 thieves at a shrine.
7 against 1.
Yeah, and he systematically slays them all. But the crucial detail, the one that gives the sword its name, is the final thief.
Right, so the guy realizes he is completely outmatched, and he panics. He tries to hide inside this massive, thick, earthen jug used for storing water or grain.
And Ittosai, he doesn't try to, fish him out. He simply steps up, swings the Kamewari II, and the blade shears completely through the solid clay jug.
And the thief hiding inside it.
In one continuous motion.
I mean, just consider the sheer physics of that for a second.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about slicing through bamboo here. Hitting thick, fired clay with a piece of high-carbon steel should, by all laws of physics, completely shatter the blade.
Or at least severely chip it, right.
Yeah.
It absolutely should. And that is exactly why the story survived. What's fascinating here is these legends functioned as a form of martial marketing.
Martial marketing, I love that.
Yeah, because if a blade possessed the structural integrity and the flawless edge geometry to survive, passing through a solid earthen jug, imagine what it could do to wooden armor.
Or a human collarbone. Well, that concept of martial marketing is pushed to an almost grotesque extreme with the second sword in our sources. The name alone is a mouthful. The Nenbutsu Dango-zashi.
It is an incredibly specific name.
Bizarrely specific. So the story goes that a warrior named Suzuki Magoshi was ambushed, or, maybe he was doing the ambushing, it was the dead of night, but he draws this sword and slashes a man from behind.
Right.
But the man doesn't drop dead. In fact, he doesn't even break his stride. The victim just keeps walking down the road chanting a Buddhist mantra, the Nenbutsu, the entire time.
And he walks for 850 meters.
That is over half a mile.
Yeah, a half-mile stroll after being struck by a katana.
It's wild. But then suddenly the chanting stops, and the man simply splits in two and collapses.
The underlying implication here is honestly terrifying. The cut was so impossibly sharp, like the blade passed through the tissue and bone with so little friction or resistance that the victim's nervous system didn't even register the systemic shock.
So his body just didn't know it was dead yet.
Basically, yeah. The body simply didn't realize it had been severed until gravity finally pulled it apart.
And here's the truly bizarre part of the story.
Yeah.
Suzuki was suspicious when the guy kept walking, so he, followed him in the dark.
Right, stalking him.
Yeah. And because it was pitch black, Suzuki used his own bloody sword as a walking cane to feel the path ahead. When daylight finally broke and he looked down at his blade, he realized the tip had effortlessly skewered a line of stones from the road,
Fretting them onto the steel like a skewer of Japanese dango dumplings.
hence the second half of the name, Dango-zashi, dumpling skewer.
Again, we are looking at stories intentionally designed to project this idea of unstoppable steel. But as these swords gained fame, their reputations began to shift from mere physical lethality to almost like supernatural protection.
Which brings us to the third sword, the Yamanbagiri Chogi. The name literally translates to Yamanba cutter.
Right, and the Yamanba is a staple of Japanese folklore. She is essentially this terrifying mountain hag or witch who lives deep in the Togakushi Mountains. And the stories warn that she lures weary travelers into her hut with the promise of food and shelter, only to devour them in their sleep.
Right, it's a classic bogeyman story, to keep people from wandering off mountain paths at night. But by specifically naming a real forged piece of steel the Yamanba cutter, the culture is doing something psychological there, aren't they?
Absolutely. It bridges a crucial gap. It elevates the weapon from a mere tool of war to a sacred relic. Like if a sword has the power to slay a mythological monster, then simply carrying it offers a protective, almost magical aura to the wielder.
And we see that magical aura take total center stage with the fourth blade, the Onimaru. This sword is classified as one of Japan's 5 swords under heaven.
Which is an incredibly prestigious elite historical classification.
Right, and its origins are just pure supernatural intervention. The archives place this in the Kamakura period, owned by a powerful regent named Hojo Tokiyori.
And he was having a really rough time.
Yeah, he was suffering from this mysterious wasting illness brought on by terrifying nightly dreams where he was tormented by an Oni, a demon. He is basically dying from sleep deprivation and terror.
Right up until one night, when the spirit of his own sword appears to him in a vision.
Yeah, the sword's spirit essentially complains to him, saying, "Hey, I am perfectly capable of killing this demon for you, but you've neglected me. I am covered in rust. I am impure and powerless."
So Tokiyori wakes up, completely cleans, oils, and polishes the blade, restoring its purity.
Yeah.
He places it on a stand next to his bed.
And the legend states that the sword magically toppled over on its own volition.
He falls over.
Yeah, and the blade cleanly severs a small, silver, demon-shaped ornament that was decorating a nearby brazier. Instantly, the nightmares stop. The demon is dead.
It's a great story.
What I find so striking about the Onimaru is that the sword has its own agency. It isn't just a piece of metal swung by a human. It is an active participant in protecting its master.
Which perfectly sets up the massive collision between these supernatural myths and the cold, bureaucratic reality of the Edo period. And that brings us to our fifth and final legendary sword, the Giri Yasutsuna.
Also one of the 5 swords under heaven. But its story in the sources completely abandons the magical demons and the mountain hags.
Yeah, all of that is gone.
We are suddenly thrust into the deeply uncomfortable, highly documented reality of an Edo period sword tester named Machida.
Right, and to understand what Machida was doing, we have to understand the shift in Japanese society at the time. By the Edo period, the massive civil wars had ended. Japan was unified under a strict, peaceful shogunate.
But you still had this massive ruling class of samurai whose entire identity was tied to their swords.
Exactly.
So if they aren't fighting in wars anymore, how do you actually prove a sword is any good? I mean, forging techniques were inconsistent back then. You couldn't just assume a blade wouldn't snap in half the first time it hit something solid.
You really couldn't. So the shogunate institutionalized a practice called Tameshigiri, or test cutting. They appointed official government testers.
Okay.
The most famous was the Yamada Asaemon lineage. And these guys weren't just butchers. They were highly paid officials who had to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of human anatomy and absolute physical precision.
Because they weren't testing these pristine, sacred blades on, like, rolled-up tatami mats like you see in modern YouTube videos.
No, they tested them on the bodies of executed criminals.
Wow.
Yeah, they would cart the corpses to the execution grounds, lay them across a specifically constructed earthen mound called a dotamba, and systematically swing the swords to measure their exact cutting potential.
And this is where we get back to that rating system I mentioned at the very beginning of our deep dive. The testers would literally inlay the results into the metal of the sword with gold.
Right.
Hidatsudo meant it successfully cut through one human torso. Fujitsudo meant it cut through 2 stacked bodies. Butsudo was 3.
And you have to think about the density of the human collarbone, the resistance of the spine, the sheer mass of muscle tissue. I mean, cutting through just one body requires an incredible combination of edge geometry and flawless swinging technique.
So when the sources state that the Dojigiri Yasutsuna was tested by Machida, and it successfully sliced through 6 stacked human corpses in a single swing, cutting all the way down into the dirt of the Dotamba mound below, it is almost impossible to comprehend that level of force.
It is a staggering physical feat.
It is wildly grim. I just keep picturing a macabre, ancient version of an Amazon product review. Like, instead of 5 stars, this sword gets a 6 torso rating.
Yeah, it really strips away all the romance, doesn't it?
Completely strips away the cherry blossoms in the incense. It's just pure, devastating, lethal utility.
Well, it was a society where violence, or at least the threat of it, was the ultimate currency. But that historical reality is what makes the second part of our deep dive so fascinating. Like, how do we leap from testing blades on 6 stacked corpses to the modern arts of Kendo and Kenjutsu?
Right. How do those lethal battlefield weapons birth an art form that is practiced safely by millions of people today?
So the catalyst for that evolution was one of the most abrupt societal shifts in modern history, the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century. The samurai class was officially abolished.
The government passed the Haitorei Edict, which basically made carrying swords in public completely illegal.
Suddenly, centuries of highly guarded, lethal combat knowledge faced total extinction because fundamentally the rules of engagement had changed.
Guns kind of ruined it.
Yeah, firearms had rendered the sword completely obsolete. I mean, why spend 15 years learning to perfectly draw a katana and cut through armor when a conscript with 3 weeks of training can shoot you with a rifle from 200 yards away?
The sources mention that master swordsmen, men who held the highest secrets of their lineages, were literally reduced to doing acrobatic street performances just to scrape together enough coins to eat.
Yeah, the entire martial art.
And it likely would have vanished entirely, if not for a few visionaries. Men like Kano Jigoro, who famously founded Judo, and a massive organizational effort by the Daiden-Nippon Butoku Kai.
Right. They realized that to save these ancient arts, they couldn't just keep teaching people how to kill. They had to engineer a massive philosophical rebrand.
This is the famous shift from jutsu to do.
Precisely. Kenjutsu translates roughly to the practical art or the technique of the sword. It is purely about functionality. They intentionally evolved it into Kendo, the way of the sword.
Okay, the way.
Right, the focus shifted from a battlefield survival tactic to a lifelong educational and moral philosophy.
But they didn't just invent this philosophy out of thin air to make it palatable for modern school children, right? The sources emphasize that they tapped into a deeply rooted spiritual tradition that had actually existed alongside the bloodshed for centuries.
Yeah, the concept of Kenzen Ichinyo.
The idea that the sword and Zen Buddhism are fundamentally one.
The spiritual framework was already there, mostly preserved by esoteric groups like the Yamabushi, the mountain ascetics. In their practices, the sword was deeply associated with the fierce Buddhist deity Fudo-myu.
But Fudo-myu's sword isn't used to sever human flesh.
No, it is an internal spiritual scalpel, and the sources are very clear on this transition. The sword transforms conceptually. It becomes a tool to sever earthly desires, to cut away evil spirits, and most importantly, to slice away the practitioner's own ego.
Okay, I have to push back on the practicality of this for a second.
Sure.
If we trace this spiritual concept back to a samurai actually standing on a muddy battlefield, if a rival warrior is charging at you with a spear, fully intending to run you through the chest, Why on earth would your primary concern be cutting away your own ego?
It sounds counterintuitive.
It sounds like a fantastic way to get distracted and stabbed while you're busy meditating on your inner peace.
It totally does, until you dig into the neurology of high-stakes combat, which the sources touch on brilliantly. To survive actual life-or-death violence, a warrior had to achieve a mental state known as Mushin.
Which translates to no mind.
Right, because if you start overthinking your technique, you freeze. Think about the biological response to a lethal threat. Your heart rate spikes, your amygdala hijacks your brain, and you enter fight-or-flight mode.
Panic, basically.
Pure panic. If your ego is active, meaning your conscious mind is desperately clinging to survival, thinking, I don't want to die, what block should I use? That processing latency slows down your reaction time.
And in a sword fight, a fraction of a second of hesitation is fatal.
Exactly. So to survive, you essentially have to abandon the conscious desire to survive. You use endless, grueling repetition to build muscle memory that entirely overrides the brain's panic response. You cut away the conscious ego so the trained body can simply react automatically. So this spiritual perfection, the severing of the ego and the total acceptance of death, didn't start as poetry. It was originally a highly pragmatic survival mechanism.
That is amazing. So spiritual enlightenment was basically a required byproduct of just trying not to get killed.
Yeah. But as the battlefields permanently disappeared, men like Kano Jigoro took that incredibly potent psychological mechanism, that intense internal focus, and repurposed it for peacetime.
The target shifted permanently inward.
Yes. Practitioners were no longer training to cut an enemy. They were using the sheer physical exhaustion and extreme discipline of the sword to forge their own character.
And because of this profound philosophical shift, the expectations of anyone stepping into a training hall to learn these sword arts were radically altered. Which brings us to the third part of our deep dive, the cold, unglamorous reality of the modern Japanese dojo.
And cold is often the most accurate word to describe it.
Yeah. I mean, imagine you decide to learn traditional Japanese swordsmanship today. Your expectation, heavily fed by movies and pop culture, is that you are going to walk into a misty, serene room smelling of sandalwood incense.
You think you're going to be a ninja.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You think you're going to be handed a mystical blade, maybe something with a pedigree like the Onimaru, and on day one, a wise old master is going to teach you a secret, deadly technique.
But the reality detailed in the first-hand travel and cultural guides is starkly, almost painfully different. You walk into a brightly lit, often freezing community center, and you aren't handed a sword.
You are handed a rag or a broom.
Right. Soji, the practice of sweeping and scrubbing the floor.
Active meditation.
And an immediate leveling of hierarchy. Before you ever learn how to strike a target, you spend weeks, maybe months, just learning the absolute basics of existing in the space. How to stand correctly, how to bow with proper intention, how to fall safely, a practice called yukemi.
The sources describe this endless, agonizing repetition of the absolute basics, the Kihon. And the atmosphere isn't like a modern Western fitness class.
No, there is no instructor clapping and yelling, "Great job, keep it up, you're doing amazing."
Not at all. The environment is defined by a rigid, unbreakable hierarchy and a highly notable lack of verbal encouragement. Progress is slow, often completely invisible from day to day.
And the physical reality of the training is brutal. The wooden floors are unforgiving. Blisters and bruises are expected.
And complaining about them is absolutely forbidden. It's like imagine walking into a 3-Michelin-star kitchen because you want to immediately cook a culinary masterpiece. And the head chef looks at you, hands you a knife, and tells you to stand in the corner and chop onions in total silence for a year.
That analogy hits the nail on the head.
It is designed to aggressively strip away all your delusions of grandeur.
Right. And if we look at the bigger picture, you realize that this grueling, unglamorous environment is not just a collection of quirky cultural traditions. The strict etiquette, the heavy silence, the endless, exhausting repetition, they are the modern forging process.
So the dojo is intentionally designed as a psychological pressure cooker.
Precisely. The mind of the modern practitioner has become the new dotamba, that earthen mound where they used to test the lethality of the swords, and the endless repetition of the basics, that is the blade, systematically and ruthlessly cutting away your vanity, your impatience, and your fear of failure.
So why should you care about any of this? I mean, if you have no intention of ever putting on armor or swinging a bamboo sword or flying to Japan to scrub a wooden floor, Why does this history matter to you?
This is our question.
It matters because the internal environment engineered inside these dojos builds a level of discipline, spatial awareness, and deep humility that is wildly applicable to surviving our modern world.
Yeah, absolutely.
We live in a society that is increasingly noise-filled, constantly distracting, and relentlessly ego-driven. The ability to endure discomfort in silence, to respect a long, difficult process without demanding immediate validation, is basically a superpower today.
The physical techniques of Kenjutsu were brilliantly designed to survive the chaos of the Sengoku period. But the psychological resilience forged in a traditional dojo is perfectly calibrated to survive the anxieties and the overwhelming noise of the 21st century.
So let's take a step back and look at the incredible journey we've just tracked. We started with blades that could split earthen jugs and functionally sever 6 stacked human corpses.
Still can't get over that.
Right. And we unpacked how that raw, terrifying, lethal utility was forced to completely evolve when the samurai class collapsed and swords were outlawed. And we tracked that evolution all the way to the quiet, painfully disciplined, heavily structured wooden floors of a modern Japanese dojo.
It is a profound historical transformation. A culture pivoted from mastering the mechanics of death to mastering the mechanics of the self.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. It builds entirely on this ancient concept of using the blade to cut away your own ego. The reality is, you likely aren't carrying a legendary sword at your waist today. And you probably aren't going to be fighting off a mountain witch on your commute to work.
We certainly hope not.
But if the ultimate modern evolution of the sword is not to cut flesh, but to conquer your own internal obstacles, how do you fight your battles today? What could you fundamentally alter in your career trajectory, in your creative art, or in your personal relationships right now? If you conceptually drew a blade to brutally, cleanly sever your own fear of looking foolish.
Wow.
What would happen if you allowed yourself to step onto the mat of your own life, drop your ego, and be a completely vulnerable beginner all over again?
It is ultimately a question of whether you have the courage to face the sharp edge of your own vanity.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a new perspective on the bloody history of the blade and maybe a new mental framework for your own challenges. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.